Les gens, les boxeurs comme c'est très agressif. Ils ont toujours ces t-shirts un peu à la Tyson, là, les shorts du cou,
When I say you must obey, just like the both of you took them
Et là, Maïva, ce sont les deux.
Ouais, le crochet. Magnifique shot.
Ah, c'est un vrai coup au corps.
Et ouais, le crochet au foie, il a touché.
Ah, c'est un vrai coup au corps.
Pendant Billboard,
Ouais,
encore un
pas
rouge.
au corps.
Allez, c'est met dur là, qui a arrêté.
Oui, forcément, elle remet un genou au sol.
Et elle regarde son point. Ça va dans tous les sens, la part des deux boxeuses. Et tout ça par les bons points. Elle a touché encore un nouveau point. Elle a du mal, Viviane.
Et
Elle a du mal à récupérer.
Start with this one. More news coming out of the welterweight division. Sean Porter, former WBC welterweight champion Sean Porter, says, I don't want to fight Keith Thurman. He's not worthy. Things aren't looking good for Keith Thurman. Keith one-time Thurman. Apparently the door's closed for a Porter fight. The door's been closed for an Errol Spence Jr. fight. Errol Spence Jr., the current unified welterweight champion in so many ways.
Yeah, he nixed that fucking idea.
He basically said, fuck Keith Thurman. I'm either moving up or moving down, because that shit, it ain't happening. Errol Spence Jr. was, however, receptive to a Yordenis Ugas fight. He said he likes that guy. He thinks that guy's a real fighter. He was even open to a Sean Porter rematch. But as far as Keith's left out in the cold. And I think because this is a PBC fighter we're talking about, the kind of fighter that's used to having these just long stints of inactivity, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the landscape to change, so on and so forth. Because this is a PBC fighter we're talking about, I wonder how much Keith actually wants to get back out there, you understand? I wonder what fire, if any, does he have left in his belly when his own stablemates are turning their backs on him. And this really drives the point home, the point that I've made to you guys in several videos throughout the last couple of months, throughout the last couple of years, that just because two guys are on the same side of the street, that doesn't guarantee that a fight will happen, because Keith's on the same side of the street as all of these guys, and you see what the talk is.
You see it.
They're giving this guy the cold shoulder. So, making it a requisite that Terrence Crawford come over to your side of things, essentially be on the same side of the street as you in order to make a fight, I told you guys before, that's just an excuse. That's just a smokescreen, because Keith's on the same side of the street as you are, and you don't want to deal with him. Terrence Crawford were to cross over to that side of things, the PBC side of things. I, like Tim Bradley, still don't think the fight would happen. I still don't think the fight would happen. I don't.
Because look at what's going on with Keith.
Isn't he on the same side of the street as all of these guys? I'll tell you something. If this pattern continues, I think that Keith Thurman will be left with little to no choice but to take on the Cuban welterweight on that side of things, who holds the lesser version of Manny's WBA title, Yordenis Ugas. I think that would probably be Keith's best option to get a fight with somebody on the PBC side of things, on PBC Island.
Assuming Errol doesn't beat him to the punch.
As that is a possibility as well. Need I remind you, Errol Spence Jr. did make light of a potential Yordenis Ugas fight. And all things considered, if Ugas has to choose between Keith and Errol, I don't know, maybe he goes with Errol. Maybe he figures he'll make more money fighting the unified welterweight champion than, locking horns with Keith Thurman. Could happen that way.
So where's that leave Keith?
Really don't expect the situation to change between Keith and Terrence Crawford. I don't think for a second that fight's going to come off. I don't think for a second, even in desperation, that Keith Thurman would resort to fighting Terrence Crawford.
Because Crawford would retire him.
I don't have a doubt in my mind about that. Keith Thurman was barely able to contain and contend with a 40-year-old Manny Pacquiao who's in the twilight of his career. You lost your belt to that guy. So what do you think Crawford's going to do to you if he gets his hands on you? You know, and I know what happens. The story here is that Keith Thurman's own stablemates, the guys that are on his side of the street, they're giving him the cold shoulder. So what is he going to do going into 2021? I don't expect Keith Thurman to fight somebody like a Yordenis Ugas his first fight back, because it's been well over a year since the Pacquiao fight, in case you guys forgot. I remind you, Keith Thurman hasn't seen any action in well over 12 months. So I hardly think he's going to walk in there with someone as able-bodied as a Yordenis Ugas to snap back a stint of inactivity. Keith is going to, once again, need to tune up. Who with? It's anybody's guess.
But it's been approximately 16 to 17 months since this guy had a fight.
I know he had surgery after the Pacquiao fight. I know that there was some kind of an injury there, but you're telling me that at no point in 2020, at no point at all, could Keith Thurman have gotten out there and had his tune-up fight so that going into 2021 he will have gotten that out of the way? You're telling me this guy couldn't find the time to conjure up a formella kind of guy? Hey, it's your career. It's your funeral. You do what you want. Things aren't looking quite bleak for the former unified welterweight champion, Keith Thurman. I don't know what 2021 is going to yield for this guy. You can forget about getting a Pacquiao rematch. Pacquiao himself has gone on air and said that he wants that Conor McGregor crossover fight. Sean Porter don't want nothing to do with you. Neither does Errol Spence Jr. You done priced yourself out of the Terrence Crawford fight.
Like he ever wanted that fucking fight.
So I don't know what Keith Thurman is going to do for what remains of his career. I hardly think he's going to move up to 154 pounds. I don't know, I don't know. I don't know what to expect from Keith Thurman in the coming year. We'll just have to see what develops. In middleweight news, per a tweet from Michael Benson, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, Eddie Hearn has said he wants Gennady Golovkin versus Demetrius Andrade in 2021 as an IBF-WBL middleweight unification. I'll be saying to DAZN, you have a contract with Andrade, you have a contract with Golovkin. Let's put these guys together. And, in order for all of this to come off, Gennady Golovkin, that guy, he's got to accept the fight. And I don't think he's going to do that. Even if Eddie Hearn takes it to John Skipper and the higher-ups at DAZN, ultimately, it's up to Gennady Golovkin to accept it or reject it. Reject the proposition. And at a time where he's got Jaime Munguia on the table,
We talked about in a previous video.
who I happen to think has a easier style for Gennady Golovkin to deal with than a slickster, a southpaw, statuesque unbeaten fighter in Demetrius Andrade, at a time when, that's one of Gennady Golovkin's options, a Jaime Munguia fight. At a time when this opponent is being made available to Gennady, what do you think he's going to do? Who do you think he's going to choose? I'd sooner believe that Gennady Golovkin and his team pursue a Ryota Murata fight before they express any interest in unifying titles with Demetrius Andrade. Demetrius, who has defended the WBO middleweight title 3 times since having won the vacant title in October of 2018, roughly 2 years ago. In that time, I've never seen Gennady Golovkin express an interest, so much as a hint, so much as a whiff, any interest at all, in fighting Demetrius Andrade. I haven't.
So what's supposed to change that now?
I'll be honest that I think that the pressure we saw DAZN putting on Canelo Alvarez before he parted ways with Golden Boy Promotions and decided to become a network and promotional free agent, the pressure that they were putting on Canelo is the pressure that they should currently be putting on Gennady Golovkin. Look at how much money he made for that Steve Rolls fight. An obscene amount. An obscene amount of money for the Sergey Derevyanchenko fight. Sergey is a very formidable fighter, make no mistake. But Gennady was grossly overpaid for that fight. He was. And how many millions do you think it costed him to have Gennady go in there? A couple of days ago against Camille Zedimata. What do you think that ran him? What do you think that costed them? I think it's about time that they get a return on their investment in Gennady Golovkin. And I think that the people at DAZN, not just Eddie making a proposition, but the higher-ups themselves.
They need to put more pressure on that guy to deliver.
Canelo Alvarez is spoken for at least the next 2 fights. All the reports coming out confirm the same thing, that Canelo Alvarez, all likelihood, will be facing Avni Yildirim in his very next fight in defense of his WBC title, as that is his mandatory, and afterwards, he's set to unify titles with Billy Joe Saunders. That rules a Gennady Golovkin.
Third fight with him.
That does rule out a third fight with that guy for at least the next 2 fights. So for the next 2 fights, what is Gennady Golovkin going to be doing? How do you justify the spending that goes into this guy? I mean, even if he decided to go up to 168 pounds in his very next fight, it's not going to be for a super fight, is it? It's not going to be for a Canelo Alvarez fight, right? No. Canelo's going to keep busy with Avni, then he's going to try to unify with Billy. So even if Gennady decided to go up there, can you really justify the spending? I mean, mean, it's about time that Gennady Golovkin move on from that Canelo Alvarez situation and look for some new blood. So if Andrade is such a hype job and he's all these, derogatory things that people like to say about him, if he's all these things, then why shouldn't Gennady Golovkin fight him?
Take care of the fucking guy.
I do happen to think DAZN should put more pressure on Gennady Golovkin to deliver, to move the needle in relevant fights with relevant fighters. And, Demetrius Andrade, he's a title holder. He's a world champion.
He is.
You know what the problem is? The Munguia fight, comparatively, might move the needle more than the Andrade fight. There's that to consider. That, what DAZN wants is results. They want fights that move the needle. And comparatively, I think the Munguia fight might actually move the needle more than the Andrade fight, even though the Andrade fight is the kind of fight that Gennady should be having. It's, for more than just, defending Gennady's title. That's 2 world titles that would be on the line in that fight. But, comparatively, I think a part of the problem is that the Munguia fight would move the needle more than the Andrade fight. There's that. We know that this is an option that Gennady Golovkin and his team have explored before. It's just that back then, Jaime
Was rejected by the Nevada State Athletic Commission 2 years ago, 2018.
He has amassed a lot more professional experience since then. It's a more viable opponent, more feasible, campaigning at the same weight as Gennady Golovkin.
Whereas before he wasn't.
I do think that's part of the problem, that there are several reasons that a Munguia versus Golovkin fight might be a more attractive proposition to Gennady Golovkin than an Andrade fight, even though an Andrade fight is the kind of fight that he should be having. I mean, how long is this guy going to just pussyfoot around? I'm not going to tell you that Golovkin versus Munguia fight won't yield a lot of entertainment value. For what it's worth, I think it would. I think it'll be a real slobber knocker for however long it lasts. I think that aesthetically, it would have a pleasing aesthetic. It's just that given the price tag that has come with Gennady Golovkin in the past, isn't it time for this guy to, be involved in something a little bit more serious?
Like a little bit more chances?
I'll tell you the truth. I won't complain much if the Munguia fight does get made based on its aesthetic, how I think the fight is going to look. But a part of me is actually hoping that this Andrade fight comes off, because I think Demetrius Andrade needs it. Moreover, I think Gennady Golovkin needs to be involved in something a little bit more serious as well. Like I said, if Gennady Golovkin's got to choose, he's going to choose the Munguia fight. If it's up to him, that's what would happen. Let's just wait and see. And finally, in heavyweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now, per tweet from Michael Benson, Alexander Usyk said, "There are a lot of guys I would like to fight and be happy to fight, like Deontay Wilder." And, this story was reported a few days ago, actually. And I wasn't in a hurry to react to it like some others here on YouTube, because I don't think it's going to materialize in anything. When it comes to Deontay Wilder, there are any number of situations that yield the same interesting situation that this fight would yield.
They're raw.
Whether you're talking about Wilder versus White, Wilder versus Chisora even, there are any innumerable number of heavyweights that make for an interesting situation with Deontay Wilder. The thing is, that's always been the case.
From the very beginning.
And that's always been the hang-up when it comes to Deontay Wilder, that this is a guy who's been around since roughly, 2008, 2009? Roughly 10 years. But he's only really faced 3 solid fighters, 3 solid opponents. Bermane Stiverne, the then WBC champion, Luis Ortiz, unbeaten at the time that he first took on Deontay Wilder, and Tyson Fury. And in 10 years, Deontay Wilder's only really fought 3 solid guys, 3 top 10 fighters.
It's been more than 10 years.
We're not talking about the Alphabet's top 10, not just the WBCs, the WBAs, the WBOs, or the IBF's top 10 ranked standings. We're talking about divisional ranked standings. The best 10 fighters in the entire weight class. In 10 years, Deontay's only actually ever fought 3 of those kinds of guys. That being said, there have never been any shortage of interesting opponents, interesting propositions out there for Deontay Wilder before he became a champion and after he became a champion. Usyk is just the latest. Usyk is just one among them. So Usyk is expressing an interest in fighting Deontay Wilder. But you tell me if you think that fight actually comes into fruition. You tell me if you think that fight materializes.
No fucking way.
It's the funniest thing, because Deontay Wilder only has 1 professional loss. That's it. Just one loss on his record. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. But given how he's reacted to it, the myriad of excuses we've heard since February of this year, the very beginning. You know, the costume was too heavy, the crab in a bucket referee, the traitor of a trainer, the Mickey that they slipped him, the shake weights in the gloves. I mean, you name it.
Stupid.
It's the way that Deontay Wilder has dealt with the loss, rather, not dealt with it.
Made excuses for it.
The loss itself wouldn't mean as much. It wouldn't seem as difficult to bounce back from. That if he were actually more open, more receptive to fights with fighters like Usyk, who are receptive to fights with him, then the loss would probably be forgotten in a matter of months.
Wilder did say he wants to fight Dillian White.
Yeah, Wilder says a lot of things, but you tell me, with that fight, much like this fight, are you holding your breath to see it happen? Is that what's going on? Is that what you think is going to come to pass? You think we're going to get Wilder versus White?
Or Wilder versus Usyk.
Or Wilder versus anybody who doesn't fight under the PBC banner. Wilder versus anybody that's not in the PBC stable. You think we're going to start seeing those kinds of fights from Wilder now?
Don't be naive.
Tell you, Wilder versus Usyk is a very interesting proposition. And it's interesting because, listen, I don't buy into the myths about Deontay Wilder's power. As far as power punches go, I don't rank him up there with George Foreman, a Sonny Liston, or a Mike Tyson. I don't think that Wilder's all that big a puncher. But I'll tell you something. I think he's a big enough puncher that if he can catch Usyk clean with that right hand of his, he could probably put him out. And the intrigue of the match is whether or not Deontay Wilder would get the chance to land that big right hand, because Usyk's claim to fame, his bread and butter, isn't brute force, isn't power, it's movement, it's agility, it's being fleet of foot, being elusive.
That's what he's good at.
That right there, my friends, is a real contest. That's a real fight. You know, Wilder, he's a big puncher as far as this era's heavyweights go. I think we can say that yeah, guy can punch. He can definitely punch. But he's not a prolific puncher, you understand? He's not a busy bee. He's not a very busy fighter.
During a fight.
Wilder doesn't have a piston jab that he constantly keeps out there to get some work done in the rounds. He floats the lead hand, floats the left hand to probe the guy.
Try to bring over the right.
He just kind of paws with the lead hand. You know, Wilder, he's really not a combination puncher. And that opens the door for this to actually be a competitive fight. Because, you know, Wilder's not that prolific a puncher. Whereas Usyk, you know, his work rate, his activity, that is one of the things he's known for. And he is rather elusive. He is a southpaw.
I honestly think it'd be a good fight.
But I also don't think for a second it's going to happen. I don't. Politics have gotten in the way of bigger situations for Deontay Wilder than an Alexander Usyk fight. I mean, if you let politics get in the way of the Anthony Joshua fight, if you let politics
fuck that fight up,
then there ain't much chance of this fight happening either.